My name is Alex Galindo. I work in the Office of Student Affairs at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Today, we welcome you to watch the first Rainbow Coalition, part of our fall film series on anti-racism and new Black cinema. On behalf of the Harvard Library, the Harvard Commons Spaces, and the Graduate School of Education's Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, we welcome and thank you for joining us. The film will be shown straight through, followed by a 20-minute discussion with director Ray Santisteban. If you'd like to ask questions, please type them in the chat section. Raymond, would you like to say a few words about the film to set us up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Alex, for setting this up and having this screening and discussion. This is a film that I started thinking about when I was about 22. This was like 1993 is when I started thinking about this film. And so it's kind of a culmination of a lot of years of thinking about movements in the United States. But that's an idea, but this is a story. So I found a story that could tell this sort of trend in the United States of coalitions. And the Rainbow Coalition, I think, is one of these groundbreaking movements that people need to know about. I think that over time, what I hope is that I think everyone in school should know about this coalition. I think it's that important to the history of this country, but nothing really has been come out about it yet. And we're hoping this creates a groundswell of people knowing about the possibilities of alliances and coalitions in terms of ways to transform communities and to uplift communities. And so this film took 12 years to make, and it was a lot of work, but it's to me, I feel very satisfied at what came out of it, because we're introducing a new idea and a bunch of new activists to the country that maybe you hadn't heard of these folks, but I think that their story is very important, especially now. We find out that when the film's done, that actually is extremely important at this particular time in the country. So I hope you enjoy it, and looking forward to your comments and your questions.
Thank you so much, Ray. All right, without further ado, we present to you the first Rainbow Coalition. Enjoy. Oh man, so intense, but so good. I'm so glad that you put all that work into it, and that you finish it, because it's I didn't know about the Rainbow Coalition, and it's just so wonderful. And I mean, obviously the struggle was very real, but it's so wonderful to see that if in during that time, people of different colors were able to come together and work together, that we should definitely be able to do that now. So again, thank you for this wonderful film. I know before we started the film, you talked a little bit about the film, but I wanted to ask the question again. Why did you decide to make this film?
I had, in the course of my career, just coming out of college, I've started working on films about activist movements. So I had co-produced a film about a member of the Black Panthers in 1991. This is going way back, but I'm just coming out of college. And while I was researching that film, I came across footage of that meeting that you see in this film of the Black Panthers and the Young Patriots. Now, at the time, I didn't know what it was, because I was like, how come these people have Confederate flags, and is that a Black Panther? And I mean, I was confused. We didn't use any of that footage, but it was this question, like, what is happening here? You know, because it's a cinema verite film, which means there's no voiceover. So there's not a lot of explanation. So I didn't know what it was, and I just kind of forgot about it. But every once in a while, I kept thinking, man, what was that footage? So it was about 12 years ago, or 13 years ago now, where I was at a conference in Chicago, and someone mentioned Bob Lee. Now, Bob Lee, I remember Bob Lee was in that old footage. And I go, Bob Lee's still alive? Because I never heard anyone talking about him. So I figured that he had passed away. And I go, where does he live? And they go, he lives in Houston, Texas. So I live in San Antonio. So that's 3 hours away. And so basically I said, you know what, I want to meet Bob Lee. And so when I went out there, I talked with him, and he started laying out, you know, what that meeting was and the coalition. And I was like, oh man, this is a great story. Yeah. And I had already had a lot of contact with the Young Lords, and so the pieces started coming together. And so that's kind of how it all started. That was the meeting of Bob Lee was the genesis, because it was like he's the thread, Bob Lee, because he was there and he's from the South. And then it just kind of all the pieces started coming together once Bob Lee was on board. And that's how the whole thing started.
That's amazing. Yeah, because I was wondering how you went about tracking these different people and interviewing them. Because as we were talking earlier, you mentioned, you didn't have a book to go by and kind of like say, okay, I'm gonna go and see these folks, and instead you had to kind of like piece everything together from scratch, basically.
Yeah.
What did that process look like for you?
It took, I mean, it was years. I mean, I mentioned this earlier film I had worked on. So this is, even back in 1990, there weren't even a lot of books about the movements, like the Black Panthers, the Chicano movement. There weren't a lot of books out. So I was about 20 years old. And what I did was during summer vacation from college, I would take road trips across the United States.
Wow.
And that's when I first met the Young Lords. And then I took a road trip and I went to the Rosebud Reservation, met people from the American Indian movement. Then I went to Denver, Colorado, met people from a group called the Crusade for Justice, which was a big Chicano movement group. Then I went to LA and met people from the Brown Berets. On my spare time, I would take these trips and I would be talking with them. Hey, tell me about what's happening. I was trying to learn. And what I was trying to learn was not in a book.
Right.
And so one of the things I realized is that whenever I'm talking with them, they're like, oh yeah, we used to work with, like the Brown Berets would be like, oh, we used to work with the Black Panthers. And then the people from the Crusade for Justice were like, oh, we used to work with the American Indian movement. And so everywhere I went, they would be like, they would just, just somehow in the conversation start talking about how they used to work with some other group. And so that was, again, like sort of learning about these coalitions and alliances. And then so when the Rainbow Coalition idea came around, I was like, oh, this is a way to tell that larger story of all of these coalitions. And we mentioned it in the middle, like, yeah, these coalitions are going everywhere. And it's true. Every community in the United States that if there was an activist movement, they had an alliance with another movement. No one was working alone and just like, hoarding information and hoarding resources. All these groups were sharing resources. Even SDS in San Francisco, I think they were sharing their printing press with the Black Panthers. When the Black Panthers needed printing, they would just go to SDS and it wasn't a big deal. It was like, oh yeah, come in and print something. And so, it was very informal in some ways. So that's where maybe people would talk about it. But the fact that it happened, I think is significant.
No, I agree with you. Because to me, earlier in the film, when they show those moments where people from like white people from the white neighborhood went into the Black people's neighborhood gathering, and how the leaders of the Black Panthers just kind of like welcomed them with open arms. To me, that was very touching and very meaningful, because they could as well be like, you know what, your people are oppressing my people, so we are not even going to engage with you. And instead, they just were like such an unbelievable ally to them. And then to not see Puerto Ricans as like, oh, the newcomers that are here to take our resources, but instead also being like, yes, come brothers, let's get together. It was to me, it's like as I mentioned earlier, I tried to get like those positive takeaways from documentaries that are very raw and real and worrying. But did you get a sense interviewing all these different leaders that they sort of like felt that same way, like hopeful and optimistic, even though they're being oppressed and killed by the police and the system and the government?
I mean, if these activists, I mean, they're probably the most positive people you're ever going to meet, because if you were being an activist in the 60s and you're still an activist now, that says a lot about your ability to weather storms, because they had to go through the COINTELPRO. They had to go through this police repression. They had to go through these jailings. And back then, I mean, people were getting beaten up. I mean, Chacha talks about it. I mean, they were getting beaten up all the time. And so, I mean, all of these folks were all positive, but again, I think there is kind of a post-traumatic stress for a lot of these folks too, because of the death and the beatings. But again, they're just, I mean, they want to change the society. They still do. And so we try to invoke that, like Chacha says, we're in a protracted struggle. We're not, they're older, but they still have that fire to try to change the world. And so, now, of course, now they're elder statesmen, stateswomen. And so now their role, in my mind, I mean, they see their role is to try to inform people, to try to share their experience, and to, encourage people today. If you want to change the society, these are some tactics and strategies to do it. And I think so that was one of the reasons I was excited about the film, because I wanted to create a space for them to do that, for them to, be able to engage other people. Now, of course, the COVID hit, the film was finished in October. we had wanted to do a lot of screening like the one we're doing, but with these folks present. And so we're still hoping to do that at some point. But, right when we were planning to do all that, the COVID hit. And so I'm actually planning some impact campaign where we do more of these screenings in targeted communities. And then, like Chacha will be involved, and Lynn French and Poison, some of the people in the film would be present, and to try to have an intergenerational dialogue by getting some of the younger activists in different communities involved in the discussion like you and I are talking.
That's amazing. That's great. I'm curious, from like literally almost your lens, right, as a filmmaker and recording history, do you feel like history is repeating itself, or do you feel like, no, this is history that is ongoing? This has been happening for a long time. It has continued to happen. Is that because, a lot of people think like, oh, this is a cycle. History is just kind of like repeating itself. But to me, it seems like no, this has been going on for a long time. It just comes to the public eye on and off. But what do you think?
Sometimes a little bit of both, but I agree with you. I mean, it's a thread. I mean, I was on a panel like kind of like this. I was participating, just listening, and one of the Black activists was saying, "Hey, we've been fighting this for 500 years. As soon as we were taken here, we began to struggle for our rights." And so this is part of that continuum, still fighting for rights, basic human rights. And the Black Panther Party was part of that struggle. And so, and I think every movement, the Puerto Rican community has its own history of struggle as well. And the Appalachian community has their own history of struggle, even going back to like the mining, union organizing and all that kind of stuff. So and that's like all, again, each one of these groups could have been their own film. Their history moving up to this. So it's such a deep history, but we try to touch on it a little bit. But to me, that's why, again, there should be some books about this so that people can dig deeper, dig deeper. This is just the intro in some ways to the ideas of the Rainbow Coalition, but it's just so like deep, and it's so, to me, it's beautiful, like what folks were doing. And like if you look at this film, I mean, you might recognize Kathleen Cleaver. She's a well-known person. Bobby Steele, who's in the film archives, is well-known, but not a lot of people maybe know about Chacha. Not a lot of people knew about Bob Lee. So I'm happy to be able to introduce, new people, new activists that you can look up to and you can learn from, besides the big leaders that everyone knows. I think there's a lot of other people that were doing stuff that, that we need to start uplifting and telling and letting them know that, hey, there were these other leaders that were responsible for doing a lot of good things back then.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you on that. And I was thinking about, not too long ago, we were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, and how sometimes, not all the time, and obviously not all the members, but sometimes there seems to be sort of this idea of like, no, this is our movement, and we shouldn't sort of like allow other people in, and kind of like white people just want to ride the wave with us. And to me, that's, again, when I saw that image of, this Black man shaking hands with somebody who was wearing like that little Confederacy flag on his hat, and knowing this is good for the movement, this is allyship that is going to move us forward. It's, to me, it just seems like such a visionary, like so ahead for that, not only that time, but this time too. So I agree
totally
with you.
agree. I totally. If this coalition was today, it still would be a groundbreaking movement. It
Yeah,
was
no,
50 years ago, and it was just imagine, in Chicago, that happened. Like if it happened today, I don't even know if it could exist because there's such a revulsion to the Confederate flag, with the
right,
today, maybe even more so than back then.
right,
I don't know if you could do this today. You cannot have people with Confederate flags today. I don't think you can do it. I mean, so it was a moment in time where the stars aligned with these specific people with this
yes,
specific background were able to make this happen. And but just going back, you mentioned the Black Lives Matter. So you talked about the circular history or thread of history. One of the things I noticed, and I was watching the film again, or just right now, is one of the things you see is that sometimes the government's been saying, not the government, but the government, the federal government. Black
yeah,
Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. That's the same as when they said the Rainbow Coalition is a gang, because it criminalizes dissent. And if you
yes,
criminalize it, then you could put law enforcement against it, and you're doing law and order. Like, oh, if you're a terrorist, then I can go against you. If you're a gang, I can go against you. If they were just activists, they can't go against activists because that's against the First Amendment. It's against, but you have to put a label on someone to give the government, or in the case of Chicago, the Chicago police, the ability to lawfully do what they did. And that's what they just said they were a gang even though they weren't.
right,
And so that's the equivalent with Black Lives Matter today. They're doing the same thing for the same reason, so they can attack that activist organization for speaking out by criminalizing it.
yeah. No, I 100% agree with you, and I'm so glad that you included that clip of the white supremacists. I don't know if protest is the right word, but parade that they were doing, and how the police, the government allows them to carry rifles and walk around the streets, and to me that is a real terrorist tactic, right? Because they're projecting this weapons and this force towards the community that they're trying to oppress. And to me, at least at a psychological level, that's a terrorist tactic. And yet they get away with that, no problem whatsoever. I don't know if you saw the footage in, I think it was Chicago too, where the Proud Boys
Yeah,
was,
yeah,
and the police is going by throwing water bottles at them, saying,
yeah,
"Thank you, we
yeah.
appreciate you guys." And to me, that's just so mind blowing. Imagine if you had all the protesters of Black Lives Matters carrying rifles walking down the street, they will have the National Guard there in a matter of seconds. And so I appreciated that you show that contrast, because it's it's an economic problem to an extent, but obviously a political one too. Um, so
That movement, again, it was basically, this happened maybe 2 months after Charlottesville. That the march that we have in the film that we documented. And
yeah,
one of the things I can tell you is when I was there, I don't keep track of these movements, but I remember seeing the footage from Charlottesville, right? And I was there at Shelbyville, and I recognized some of the people. So what I realize is they only have a small group, but they travel to other places. Those people are not from there.
yeah,
They drove in there they're trying to recruit. So that's why they had that event there. They're trying to recruit, and the media plays along with it, because I can tell you this is after the event, like I was on one side and they didn't allow me to go to the other side where all the white supremacists were. You had to either start with the white supremacists and stay there, or you had to be with the counter protesters and stay there.
huh,
And so I was trying to get footage, right, of the white supremacists, and all the footage is of them. They don't have footage of the counter protesters, which means they're promoting
yeah,
the white supremacists because they have all this footage, because it's shocking to see the Nazi and all this. So they're in some ways they're perpetuating it, because they don't have anyone saying, yeah, these people are fascists and they're white supremacists. Nobody says that. They just have them, blood and soil, whatever they're saying, and
yeah,
you will not replace us. And it's like, you're promoting them.
yeah,
And it's one of these. It's interesting. I could not find footage from the side that I was on taping. Luckily I was there to tape that. That's the footage is in there. Is the footage I personally shot.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It is really sad how the media unfortunately wants to sensationalize everything.
That's it. That's what it was. That's what it was.
It's no longer about depicting the facts, showing a fair picture. It's all about what's going to give us the highest ratings.
That's it.
What's going to shock the audience the most.
That's when the correlation is with the rise of Donald Trump. He says bombastic things, they put him on the news. And he next thing you know became president. He got all that free press. Yeah. He wasn't buying press because he was just saying crazy stuff and it was getting people to watch. So there's a symbiotic relationship between these sort of crazy right-wingers and the media. They'll do anything to get the ratings, and the one that suffers is society, because they're not allowing for these the thoughtful voices aren't heard on the news. The bombastic people, the people that yell, the people that shout, the people that talk crazy, those are the ones that are on the news a lot. Yeah. And it's, I don't know what's going to change that, because you can't, like, if you look at the 60s, like when you had like James Baldwin and stuff, you had public intellectuals. They don't want that kind of conversation anymore with really smart people talking about the issues of today. They just want people yelling and threatening and shouting. Yeah. That seems to be where things are now. And so anyway, I think it's a disservice to the country and society and to our communities.
Absolutely, I agree. And one thing that has come across in the couple of last documentaries is how unfortunate and sad it is that whenever Black leaders come about and are being showcased and start to really lead a movement, the police, the government puts them in prison, kills them. And then in one of the previous documentaries that we're talking, we have a whole generation of young Black men who don't have leaders to look up to. And so that's why I appreciate that in your documentary, as you mentioned, you brought Bobby to light, because unfortunately he passed away from cancer, but at least it was a leader that wasn't killed or put away by the police or the government. And that's why I think this documentary is very meaningful for, as we were talking in the previous screenings, young Black men and young Latino men and brown men to see leaders, come up and lead a movement. Ray, I want to thank you so much for your time and again for being with us. Are there any closing remarks, words that you would like to share with us?
Well, I mean, I think, I saw the film again, I haven't seen it in a while, but I'm always struck by just, what these people were able to do. These people did not have any resources, did not have any money. And, the Chacha at that time, he had an 8th grade education. They weren't educated people, not all of them. And they were able to do so much. So I'm always encouraged by it. Hopefully the audience is encouraged by this, that what's possible when you work together. And so part of it, I think the lesson is maybe it's not a coalition, but the key is organizing. That was the fulcrum of it. The Young Lords were organized on their own. The Black Panthers were organized on their own. Young Patriots were organized on their own. And then they got those organizations together, to work together, and they created a stronger movement. And immediately after they founded that movement, the police went after them immediately because they saw the possibility of that coalition. A coalition like that is a political threat, both then and today. And so anyway, I hopefully people can, take that and be inspired by that lesson, that challenge that generation, did in terms of trying to push the envelope and embrace, uncertainty. Like, again, like you mentioned, for the Black Panthers to work with this group with the Confederate flag, that's taking a leap. The Black Panthers didn't have to do that. They were a very large international movement. They don't have to work with this small group of Appalachians in Uptown. But the fact that they wanted to try that as an experiment, the radical imagination of it, I think it's something to be celebrated. I think it's something that we can be inspired by, hopefully, and to know that, you know, when if you can, you know, you can move forward and trust in other people, you know, I think good things can come out of that if you can get organized together.
Absolutely. Ray, thank you so much again. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I hope you have a wonderful weekend, that you're able to recover a little bit from how hectic this week has been, and we have some good news soon out of this election.
I hope so. We'll see. Well, thank you. Thanks again for inviting me, and appreciate the opportunity to share my work with you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
Thanks.